But the history of Ethiopia is very tied to Christianity and the Bible as well, because of King Solomon of Israel, who who made a union with Queen Sheba of Ethiopia, and they had a child named King Menelik the First. You had to prove your lineage going back to King Menelik, and from was conquering line of Judah, which is which is even more connected to the Bible because in Matthew chapter 1, it is linked to the lineage of Christ, and in Revelations, Christ himself is actually referred to as Lion of the tribe of Judah. And King Menelik, like he had a grandson named Iyasu, but he also had a cousin named Ross McConan who was like a governor or a prince in that time, and he had a son Safari, but the mother died like not too long after his birth, almost a year and a half, and then in 1905, Ross McConan himself he suddenly died, so that leaves again no real heir to the throne. Before he ended up dying, he elected his grandson underneath of of a Ross, which was like a duke or a governor during that time, and then he took Safari, which was the son of his cousin. He he put him as governor of I don't know how to say that, but like Salat, Salali. But then King Menelik ended up dying from a third stroke in 1913, and his grandson Iyasu goes on a path of brutality, and Menelik's wife, Empress Tetu, she pretty much encourages that path of destruction that he's on. She elected um, Safari as governor of his hometown, Harar, and but one of the bad things that she did do, along with the Yasu, she removed a lot of the people that Menelik had appointed. She removed a lot of them from the throne or from being a part of the ruling class. And Yasu Yasu kind of went against the tradition of Ethiopia because he supported he supported the Islamic followers more than he did followers of Christianity, which goes against their history as is very connected to the Bible. And he even supported the Islamic um, like forces during World War I, and he just overall wasn't fit to be a good leader. So those things ended up him to be pretty much removed from being able to rule. That's
Okay. So to pick up from there, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the rise of Tafari and kind of how he came to power following Ieyasu. Quickly been established there were three reasons Ieyasu fell. He was trying to fight Tafari's power, who was popular at the time, who was believed to have been the successor beforehand. He had allied with the Germans and Turks in 1914, and then he had allied with the Muslim leaders as well. And following Iyasu's fall, there was some inner struggles in terms of the executive politics of Ethiopia, but Tafari was eventually able to banish all the former council members and assert his new power. And he was viewed, in the book's words, as a man of destiny. So he was revolutionary in most aspects. He fought for the abolition of slavery. He put faith in international alliances like the League of Nations. And this was all because of the focus he had on education, traveling the world, especially Europe, and learning about what works and what doesn't. So all he had to do now at this point, essentially establishing himself as the new power, was to actually hold the title. But unfortunately, the Empress, Menelik's widow, was still alive and would fight him on this. But he did eventually succeed to the throne at 37 as the new Emperor Haile Selassie, following the death of Empress Zuditu and her husband's minor rebellion. Centralization and education were his biggest platforms at the beginning of his rule. He wanted to fight the existing feudal state that existed in Ethiopia, which made him very popular with the young and the educated. He would also support economic development and infrastructure. And he would hold one of the earliest events in his rule was this impressive coronation he put together where he summoned all of the Rosses, which Lakay talked about as kind of being like these lower authorities, to work in secret on his biggest project yet, is what he described it as, which was a modern constitution based off of several advanced states like those in Europe and Asia. This effectively transformed Ethiopia into a limited monarchy, with many calling it window dressing, but it was a revolutionary step nonetheless. So as you can see, he was bringing Ethiopia more into the modern world, similar to Europe. And returning to his focus on centralization, there would be no longer be private armies underneath feudal lords like the Rosses. There would now be a salaried national army, so a further cementing of centralized authority. And Selassie's rule went fairly well at the beginning until Italy under Mussolini would violate their peace treaty in 1936 and invade Ethiopia again, which forced him into exile in England for 5 years. Selassie had put faith in the League of Nations in the years prior, but now he had to call them out for essentially failing to protect him and failing to uphold international law in the face of the fascist attack. And he was offered a choice in exile. He could either return but accept a reduced status or stay gone. And Selassie instead chose to side with guerrilla forces who would fight in his stead in Ethiopia while he was in exile in England for 5 years. And then things would finally change in 1939 with the outbreak of World War II, when Mussolini sided with Hitler and united Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Somalia, creating Italian Eastern Africa, which would finally invoke the Allies to attack and storm the region, allowing Selassie to reestablish himself as emperor.
He signed the Anglo-Ethiopian Agreement on January 31st of 1942 that gave Ethiopia its full sovereignty back. And then Ethiopia joined the United Nations in 1945. As he was trying to change or revise the 1931 Constitution, he got delayed because no one was believing in his promise of democracy, and it just kind of got shoved under the carpet. And then next on his agenda was to gain Eritrea in their landmass. He wanted this for economic and strategic imperatives. And then the Americans came in and kicked out the British, which was the Americans kind of kicked them out, and they sent in money around 1945 and basically took over the Ethiopian diplomacy. And in 1950, the emperor was able to pass the resolution 390A, which joined Eritrea and Ethiopia under the sovereignty of the Ethiopian crown. In May of 1963, the emperor created the Organization of Africa Unity. In December of 1960, the coup or revolt happened. The leader of this coup was his head bodyguard, Germain Niwe, and they used the emperor's son, Prince Asfa Wozen, as like a puppet to get the emperor to do what they wanted. The coup failed because most of the guard was still loyal to Emperor Tafari, and the people who were part of the coup kind of dispersed. Most were killed or banished, but the coup did loosen bonds with the Ethiopian government. So the student activists were fighting against the emperor, and labor unions and military were also getting involved. The emperor signed the Labor Relations Proclamation in 1963 to help with working conditions and standards for people who are working. But after the coup, the emperor cleaned out his office and military and was now very vulnerable. He tried to fix a lot of things with commissions, but none of them really satisfied the people. While the student radicals and the labor unions and the military were all still fighting for better lives, there was a split between the Soviet Union and China that impacted what was happening in Ethiopia. Two factions were made, the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Party and the All Ethiopia Socialist Movement. And the emperor was trying to fix things, but he was old and he was not getting anywhere with anyone. There were regional rebellions across the nation. The Eritrean guerrilla troops massacred a group of Ethiopian troops. And then there was the drought in 1973, which killed many people in an Ethiopian region. And so that it was just bad thing after bad thing happening to the emperor. And then rebellions in the military started. And the military started backing up the student movements. And then the Derg got involved in 1974 to deal with the revolution. Mengistu Haile Mariam was the leader of the Derg at that time. And on September 12, 1974, the Derg announced the overthrow of the emperor's regime, and the emperor's son, Asfa Wozen, was named monarch. And the emperor died 1 year after his overthrow, and his death is a mystery, and he died lonely, which was very sad. The end. And the author, Bereket Habte Selassie, was an insider of most of the emperor's ruling. He was of Selassie's students of Selassie's educational system that he set up, and he told him to go into the judicial system, but he was still very close with Selassie and was able to get these good stories and points for the book and be able to explain it very well.